ready? Maybe have a seat. Maybe have a seat. Yeah. Wait, he should be seated. Everyone that's speaking should be seated.
You're live.
Oh, I'm live. Hi, everyone. Welcome, everyone, to this very special and final edition of Now Play This. It's been quite a ride. 11 years. We have Bea Buckingham here. She and Holly Gramazio were the founders. This all started as an experiment. Well, there was like the first wave of festival exploring the possibilities of games beyond main entertainment and what most people know about games. And there has been many editions, many directors. We have also Sebastian Quack over here. He was artistic director for over 3 years. But I mean, we are having all this conversation prepared for the ending session on Saturday. We're here today to listen to a bunch of very lovely, important people that have been doing a lot of different work on game design, academic, scholar researching around games, and specifically around fall games. And this is a really special topic, I think, to be closing the festival because, I mean, when I first started learning about fall games, I have an initial idea, but I learned that there's much more about fall games that we maybe all think about, and there are a lot of different perspectives to approach this. But there's one common thread about community, collaborative creation, and making rules, making our own rules. So we'll be hearing about that. And I want to especially thank my partners in crime, the Cologne Game Lab, who was also partnering last year with the Symposium. We have Philip Bohar here and Sonia Fisek, who couldn't come, and Ruth Dorotea, who will join in for the final session. And we also have David Murphy, who was also a companion last year, and together we have crafted what we hope will be a very inspirational lineup of speakers. I want to thank, of course, Somerset House for having been our host house for over 11 years, the London Game Festival, the Goethe Institute, and the amazing team behind this. We couldn't have done it without them. Lexi Stevens, our lead producer this year, Joe Summers, behind things with all the tech stuff, Daniel Green, again joining. He has been part of the festival, also as a producer, as an artist, as a technical. We have so many hats. But I think this is all for me. I'm Hannah Ulton. I'll be hosting and welcoming you in case you need anything. And I'm giving the word now to Neil Moody, but let me introduce him first. For those who are listening from home, you can share your questions. And Neil Moody is an artist, game developer, and lecturer at Alberta University, whose work explores small-scale, amateur, and hobbyist approaches to game making. His research focuses on flattening the hierarchy between player and designer, a principle that resonates deeply with the theme of fall games. In this interactive talk, the Why Fall Games Manifesto, Neil takes inspiration from the Bread and Puppet Theater's iconic Why Cheap Art to ask us, why do fall games matter in a world saturated with digital play and tech-mediated experiences? Join me in welcoming Neil.
Yeah. Oh, no.
No, sorry.
No, that's fine.
Okay, hello. So, this is going to be the Why Folk Games Manifesto. The theme of this talk is basically why folk games matter. It's going to be a bit of an experiment. This is going to be a talk split into 3 parts. I'm going to talk for a bit just about why folk games matter to me. Then we're going to attempt to make a folk game together. And we're going to finish up by writing our own manifesto. So we're going to write our own manifesto. I believe we have a printer set up, so we'll also print that out and hand it out to anyone who wants to have a hard copy of it. But to start, I'll just give a wee bit more context about me. Lou did a great introduction, but I just want to talk a wee bit about myself to explain kind of why this matters to me. So I am an artist, game developer, and part-time lecturer at Abertay University. My original background was in music technology before I moved on to making kind of small-scale indie video games. These days, I am doing a lot more stuff in kind of analog games, so like tabletop and folk games. And as kind of Lou said, I'm particularly interested in kind of small-scale work, the kind of things that sometimes get called like amateur or hobbyist. And yeah, my current research is focused on flattening the traditional starting with the Why Cheap Art Manifesto, which is what gave this talk its title. So this is a manifesto written by the Bread and Puppet Radical Puppet Theatre group in the States. And I'm just going to read it out because I love a good manifesto, and I think this is a pretty good manifesto. So, the Why Cheap Art Manifesto. People have been thinking too long that art is a privilege of the museums and the rich. Art is not business. It does not belong to banks and fancy investors. Art is food. You can't eat it, but it feeds you. Art has to be cheap and available. Art is like good bread. Art is like green trees. Art is like white clouds in blue sky. Art is cheap. Hurrah. so, so I do like this manifesto, and I like its focus on art as something that is necessary and something that should be kind of accessible to everyone. But there are a couple of things that I would maybe take issue with. So first, I feel like it focuses almost entirely on the consumption of art, on making art available to as many people as possible. In that regard, but for me, I think art is most valuable as something that is active and participatory, something that we make together. So personally, I'm more interested in the practice of art being made widely available, and also kind of ultimately seen as something that is almost like an everyday activity, almost as natural as breathing. And secondly, in its goal to kind of advocate for art being available to everyone, and it does kind of focus on making art cheap, which is very much kind of an economic argument. And that's understandable, like we all live under capitalism after all, but I think personally I'm increasingly conscious of and interested in the ways that capital shapes what we make, and also how we think about what we make, and who gets to make it. So I'm going to talk about that for a minute, and I'm going to paraphrase Max Haven's book Art After Money, Money After Art here, because it's one of the things that kind of helped clarify my own thoughts on this. So one of the things I found really helpful and also challenging about Haven's book is the way that Haven describes art as a concept as something that only really came into existence as capitalism became a dominant ideology. And that's not to say that we didn't paint or write or sing or make games before capitalism. It's more that, or I guess he would argue that we kind of understood those things a bit differently. Because I think one thing that is constant across humanity is our playfulness, our creativity. By some compulsion we have that we can't fully articulate. And under capitalism, that's maybe a problem, because for capitalism to function, it kind of has to be able to understand the world in terms of like specific like value. It needs to be able to judge things against each other. And all of that kind of roiling mass of creativity and weirdness that I was talking about, it's never really going to fit super neatly into someone's spreadsheet. But at the same time, capitalism is kind of built on that creativity. Like, capitalism requires growth. It needs new things to buy and sell. That roiling mass of creativity is fuel for all of this. So Haven describes how people started to define art as something specific, or maybe more accurately, a series of specific somethings: music, literature, film, etc. And it's not like these things are ever like fully defined; they're like constantly contested. But they are kind of defined enough that capitalism can kind of understand them in like economic terms. But I think what I'm most interested in these days is how that functions, and particularly the consequences of that. So what gets to be seen as acceptable as art or as a game under capitalism, and what is seen as lesser or unnecessary or just incomprehensible. And I think for me, at this point in my life, I want to make art and games that are incomprehensible to capital. I want to work in the space that typically gets derided as hobbyist and amateur, because for me, that's the space that gives me the most hope for the future and that I find most exciting. So I'm just going to read a quote from Haven's book, because I think it sums up my own kind of feelings on this better than I can. So I am most interested in the way art functions in what Gregory Shillette calls the dark matter, the hidden mass of creativity in society at large on which the art world depends, but that it does not include. These include all those heavily indebted art students who will never see their name on a gallery wall as either all of those so-called amateurs, hobbyists and tinkerers whose creative labour will never be valorised, and especially all those sly activists, vengeful tricksters, weaponised malcontents and communist hackers who leverage art toward radical ends, or even simply in the name of a yet unforeclosed possibility of freedom or joy. And I highlighted that last section because for me that kind of, there's something beautiful about that phrasing, a yet unforeclosed possibility of freedom or joy. That's the space that I most want to work in. So, that's maybe enough about talking about of me talking about art. Let's talk about games. And again, I'll ask you to bear with me a bit because I'm going to talk more about video games for a second before we finally get on to folk games. I took this slide. This is a screenshot. I did a Google image search of the word games, and this is what came up. And I think this is kind of a good illustration of. I think video games in particular are a good illustration of how capital kind of shapes what we make and how we kind of think about what we make. And this is kind of one example of that. But I'm more interested in the consequences of this. So I want to talk a bit about the kind of expectations that kind of ultimately get imposed upon us, particularly as people who make games. So starting with audience expectations. So this is a series of screenshots of Steam reviews, Steam forum threads, Reddit threads, all from gamers who are either upset that a game on Steam doesn't have Steam achievements, or are just outright saying they won't play a game if it doesn't include achievements. And for context, on the Steam PC games platform, Valve, who run it, have put together a fairly extensive framework for developers to implement achievements into their games, and for players to share the achievements that they've achieved with their friends. At the same time, Valve do not require you to implement those achievements in your games, but as we can see, just the fact that this corporation has kind of made the possibility available, it's started to shape audience expectations. And that's important because for me, like, that's whether or not to include achievements in your game is a game design decision. Including achievements in your game, that alters your game's design. It requires you to think about how you're going to incorporate them and how you can make them make sense within the context of the game you're making. So this is kind of an example, I think, of the ways that we get this kind of soft pressure to make games in a very particular way and alter our game's design to fit that. Moving on, you'll have to bear with me a sec. I'm going to quickly just drag a window over. Oops, that's not what I meant to do. So this is Microsoft's requirements for developers who want to publish their game on Xbox. And I'm just going to quickly scroll through this. We're not going to look at this in detail. The main thing I want to convey is just how long this list is and how many requirements there are if you want to publish your game on Xbox. And one of the things to kind of bear in mind here is that this isn't necessarily an entirely bad thing. A lot of these requirements are, sorry, I've put my mouse on the wrong screen. A lot of these requirements are kind of oriented around accessibility. They're to make games more widely accessible to the audience, to make them more readily played by as wide a range of people as possible. And that's obviously that benefits Microsoft. It potentially like increases their audience, and it benefits the players, right? Like it makes these games, it makes more people able to play these games. But at the same time, from a developer's or a game designer's perspective, like this again, like kind of changes or alters what how we think about our games and like what we're able to do, because to some degree, some of these requirements will alter the design of your game. But at the same time, there's so many requirements there. This also shapes who is in a position to publish on Xbox. There's who has the skills, the time, the resources to actually fulfill all of these requirements. So we kind of see how all of this stuff is kind of coming together to shape not just how we think about what we make and what we make, but also who gets to make it. And on that note, here is a selection of screenshots of a few recent games industry job postings. Most of these are for internships. There are a couple for like kind of next step up on the ladder. All of them are really quite extensive. There's quite a lot that people are kind of expected to be able to do before they can even start making a game or like working on a commercial video game. Some of them require university degrees. All of them require varying degrees of experience, whether that's experience working in the games industry, experience with a particular game engine, or just knowledge of kind of quite detailed like game development terms, like 3C's specialist, for example. And again, we kind of see how it's kind of understandable how we get to this position, but at the same time, this is very much kind of further shaping who gets to make games, or at least make commercial games. And also, I think it also shapes who gets to think of themselves as game designers, or who gets to imagine themselves as someone who could be a game designer, who could make games. And it's maybe a little unfair for me to focus so much on commercial video games, because I think everyone in this room is aware that video games are just a small part of like what we understand of the kind of vast complexity of games as a whole. But I do think that we saw from that Google image search, like we are increasingly encouraged to think of games to mean specifically video games. And this, for me, is where folk games are really valuable, because I think in a lot of ways, folk games are kind of the opposite of all of that. I think they hold open a lot more space for the kind of weird and interesting stuff that doesn't necessarily make sense in a capitalist context. And I think it's a lot easier for someone who's never made a game to be able to imagine themselves as someone who could make games just via the medium of folk games. So, I think it's important that I kind of clarify what I mean by folk games. This is not intended as a rigid definition, but this is how I understand them. And I should also shout out my colleague at Abertay, Lynn Love. I kind of came to this definition from a really useful conversation a few years back. So for me, folk games are games that are primarily passed on by word of mouth, and I think that has all sorts of interesting consequences, which I'll touch on a bit. They're also games that, and I think this is also important, that don't require props. All they really need is people. There are obviously plenty of folk games that make use of balls, ropes, and that kind of thing, but there's also plenty of folk games that don't need any of that. They just need other people. And I think that's kind of important when we kind of increasingly inhabit a world where we're constantly being sold new technologies to kind of encourage us to do things in a particular way, and sold subscriptions to do things that maybe don't need subscriptions. It's kind of, folk games are to some degree a useful reminder that there are a lot of things we can do just with other people. Most importantly for my own research, folk games I think are easily changed, and they're frequently changed. This is kind of comes back to the first point, like because they're passed on by word of mouth, they kind of naturally shift and change, just in the way that a telephone game shifts and changes the meanings of phrases as they pass on. Folk games change all the time. They change often unintentionally, but I feel like that also opens the door for people to change them intentionally. it makes it easier to imagine how you might change the rules. And they're often also, and this is another thing that I find fascinating, they're often also geographically specific. We frequently see the same folk games played all around the world, but often with subtle differences. Maybe they've got a different name, or they've got slightly different rules. And I think they also kind of embed a kind of personal and kind of cultural history in them. Like frequently you talk to someone about the folk games that they played growing up, or that they played at a particular games event, and you don't just hear about the rules of the game, you kind of hear about the context that that game was played in, and you get a sense of the person who's telling you, but you also get a sense of the history of the game and the place. And I think there's something really fascinating about that. So from there, I'm going to talk about my favorite folk game, or at least my favorite folk game today. This will probably change, but if you ask me again tomorrow. And that's the game Simon Says. So I should also, in this case, I need to shout out another colleague. This is a slide from a project I did with my colleague Jan Sesnek a few years ago. It's actually Jan's slide, so I hope he doesn't mind me repurposing it for this talk. This is basically some of the different names for Simon Says as it's played around the world. And I assume everyone kind of knows what Simon Says is, but just in case, the way Simon Says works is it's really quite a simple game. You have a kind of instructor who issues instructions to a group of players, and players either follow or don't follow the instructions based on whether the instructor prefaces them with the phrase Simon Says. So if they say Simon Says, do X, and the players do the X. If they don't preface it with Simon Says and the player then does the instruction, that player is out of the game. So very, very simple. But I think the reason Simon Says is, I think, my favorite folk game is, firstly, it's got that kind of geographical specificity. You can kind of see that some of these are like very much clear variations on the phrase Simon Says, but others there are a number of like variations that are more along the lines of the captain commands. And my favorite variation is the one that's played in Germany and I think a few other countries, which is actually, apologies to any like German speakers in the audience. This is the version that's called Alle Vögel fliegen hoch, which translates as all birds fly high. And the way this works is, it is fundamentally Simon Says, but it has a slightly different format. So the instructor will always give an instruction in the format of all X fly high. So if they say all birds fly high, then everyone has to jump and kind of flap their arms. If they say all planes fly high, then again everyone jumps and flaps their arms, or maybe like makes plane motions. But if they say something like all pigs fly high and somebody jumps, they're out of the game because pigs don't fly. Now, the reason I like this one is because to me there's something just slightly poetic, just slightly evocative about the combination of that phrase, all birds fly high, and the players like doing that action of jumping and flapping their arms. To me that suggests a kind of longing on the part of the players to join the birds in the sky. And it's a very like small thing. It's really not hugely changed from the Simon Says that I grew up with, but that small change kind of I feel like it makes kind of a big difference. It changes the feel of that game. So yeah, coming to the end of this first section, I'm going to try and sum up why folk games matter to me. So I think kind of coming back to that Max Haven quote that I read out earlier, I think they inhabit that kind of yet unforeclosed possibility of freedom and joy in a lot of ways. It's kind of hard for me to imagine how they might be fully co-opted or commercialized. I think they're fundamentally participatory, and I mean that not just in the obvious way of like players playing together, but also in the sense that, or also from like a creator's or game designer's perspective. I think it's very kind of easy for me to imagine someone playing a folk game and then immediately thinking about how they might change things in a very small way, just because they're probably aware, just from having spoken to other people, that there are all different ways to play this game. They're very kind of open to change. And it's not a guaranteed thing, but I think there's a kind of liberatory potential there. I think it's important that people understand games as things that they can make, as things that they can change. I feel like there's so much in this world that kind of leaves us feeling powerless. And if there's to be kind of any like long-term future for humanity, I think we need to push back against, or find ways to push back against that powerlessness, even if it's something small like changing the rules to a folk game. And on that note, we are going to attempt to make our own folk game. If you bear with me a second. So what we're going to do is, I figured we could just use Simon Says as a kind of basis for this. And I've kind of broken it down, or broken the design of our game down into 7 questions. So in a minute, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand or just shout out answers to these questions, and we're going to make a game. I'm going to see what happens when we do that. I'll read out the instructions first, just to kind of clarify what some of them mean. So, first question: who is going to be issuing the instructions? Also, I should clarify. Once we've made the game, we're going to play it. So, who issues the instructions? Who follows the instructions? What do the instructions look like? Do we want to do something similar to Alla Virgil Fliegen Hoch, where we have like a very specific format? Or is there something else we could do? Then what indicates whether an instruction should be followed? Is that something like a concrete phrase that has to be said? Or do we want it to be something a bit more subtle? Something that the players might be more likely to miss? Then what happens if someone follows the wrong instruction? Typically with Simon Says games, you get knocked out of the game, but that's not the only thing we could do. There's plenty of things that we could do differently when someone gets an instruction wrong. I think it's probably important to also ask the question if there are any red lines we want to avoid, anything we definitely don't want to have in our game. And then lastly, I'm going to get you to name the game. So, okay. I've tested this with 5 people sat around a table, and it worked well. I've never tested it in a room this big, so we're going to find out what happens. So, who issues the instructions? If you want to raise your hand. Okay, yourself. The youngest player. Okay, you know what? Let's go with that. I'm not sure how we determine that in a room this size, but I also think part of the point of this is to embrace the chaos and see what happens. So, the youngest player is going to be following the instructions. Okay, who's going to be, it's going to be issuing the instructions. Who's going to be following the instructions? Yourself. The oldest player. Okay. Okay, yep. Okay, okay. And then what do the instructions look like? Yes. Okay, how do we convey the secret task? Oh, okay, okay, okay. And then what indicates whether an instruction should be followed? Yes, yourself. Okay. I think that's fun. Let's try that. Uh, the instructor is sticking out their tongue. Oops. Okay. And then what happens if someone gets it wrong? Okay. I think that's good. Yes. I think also we maybe need a mechanism to not just have 2 players playing the game constantly. Any suggestions? Oh, so if you hear laughter, we move to the next oldest player. Yes, age range. Let's maybe do age ranges. Yep. Move to next. Yeah. Okay. Does anyone have any red lines they want to avoid in this game? Okay. I'm going to say no. Okay. And what's the name of this game? Who's good at naming things? Yes. Meet in the middle. Okay. That sounds good. Oops. Let me. Okay, so are we ready to play the game? I guess if we're doing age ranges, for youngest player, is there anybody under 20 here? Oh, okay. Okay, so if you're cool with, are you cool with being our first instructor? Is it, you don't have to. We can move up a range and move up a range. Okay. Okay. In that case, let's see. Who's under 25 and is willing to? Oh, yes. Yeah. Do you want to do that? Okay. Everybody, stand up, and I'm just gonna let. Yep. Okay. Youngest person, this side. So if you think, I guess if you're under, let's say, under 25, line up against this wall, and then 25 to 30 up till about there, 30 to 40, and then 40 plus.
I can attempt to capture this
Yep.
by turning the live stream towards this.
Yep.
Just maybe, even though there's a warning when people come in, when I do that, like when
Oh,
you
do
start
you want
talking to
me to-
everyone, can you just say
Yep.
if anyone, this is being recorded, if anyone doesn't want to be
Yep.
recorded,
Yep.
just let them so
I came for that and continue. Because I forgot to say that.
Yep. Okay. That's going well. Okay.
and let me know how it looks.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, we have a bunch of people, but
Okay. Uh, everybody. Everybody. We've got the webcam. Uh, can everyone hear me? Yes. Okay. Okay. I'm going to speak right up against the microphone. So just so everyone's aware, we've got the webcam pointing at you, so we can see this on the live stream. Is anybody not cool with being on the live stream?
Tell them to make themselves known to me.
Okay. If oh yes. Okay. Uh. So over there. No. Yep. Okay. You're good. Okay. Okay. Let's get started. So, whoever I can't quite see who's at the end here. Whoever's at the end here, you are the instructor. You need to meet with the person at this end and whisper a task into their ear. Whoever wants to go first, I realize I'm putting you on the spot. Somebody from here, whoever is the first person from left to right who wants to give an instruction. Okay. Yes. If you want to come over and whisper instruction to this gentleman on the end. Oh, meet in the middle. Sorry, both of you. If you want to meet in the middle. Yep. On you go. Yes. 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 Either stick out your tongue or not. That's the game. Oh, oh, I heard laughter. I heard laughter. So, uh, we don't know. We didn't hear the instruction. Was did he follow your instruction? Oh, okay, okay. What indication? Oh, okay. So you got it right. There was still laughter. Okay. What do we feel? Do we feel like if we laughed, that counts as a failure? Yes. Let's do that. So we're going to change it up slightly. Uh, the two of you are going to try and make everyone laugh. If you succeed, then you have to do it again, I guess, because that's Simon says. If you fail, then someone else takes over. Okay. It can be anything, but maybe something silly. Yeah. You laughed. Okay. Well, if we're going by the rules of Simon Says, everyone laughed, so you have to do it again. Oh no, wait. Oh no, you're right. I've got it the wrong way around. I've got it the wrong way around. That's totally right. So you did it. You successfully failed. Okay. Yes. Okay. So do we want to swap up to next pair of players? Yes. Okay. Okay. So if both of you want to return, uh, and yes, round of applause. And I guess yeah. Okay. Yes. Yes, that's right. Players have lost both times, but that means you did great. So, you want to go back, and we'll get next pair of players. Okay. If you make everyone laugh, then you win and they lose. If you fail to make them laugh, they win and you lose. So just yeah. Yep. Yep. Okay, so I do want to make a manifesto together, so we'll maybe go for like one more pair and then call it a day for the making a folk game. So who's next? Anybody? Okay, I'm gonna point. I'm gonna point. I'm just gonna gradually move. If you see me pointing at you and you are cool with being the person, yep. I think you successfully got a laugh. Cool. That was every bit as chaotic as I was expecting it to be. So yeah, if you want to like take your seats again. Uh, okay. So actually, what I need to do here is that. Okay. Okay. Good. Good. Okay, so I figured the way we'd do this is I'm just going to, again, ask for your suggestions, and I'm just going to add them into this document. So on the left, I've got the original Why Cheap Art manifesto just for reference, and to kind of keep things hopefully moving as fast as possible, I figured we'd start by just reworking the initial paragraph to be about folk games instead of art, and then I'm going to get you to just shout out slogans to fit in this section. So yeah. So I guess the first thing we need to fill out is the first sentence. So people have been thinking too long that what is a privilege of what and the what. Raise your hand if you have any ideas. Yes. Okay, that makes sense. Let me put that in. Folk games is a privilege of children. Do we want like a second group? Children and the unemployed. Okay. um, yes, let's go with let's go with that. Next, what is not business? Oh yeah, delight is not business. It does not belong to banks and fancy investors. What is food? Fun is food. Okay, you can't eat it, but it feeds you. What has to be cheap and available to everybody, or do we want to replace cheap also? Anyway, start with what has to be available to everybody. Play. I'm going with play. And do we want to keep cheap there? I don't know if that makes a whole lot of sense with in the context of folk games. Ah, yes. Let's go participatory. Oh, there we go. Okay, next. I want some slogans. Shout out some slogans for me. Balloon animals for everyone. Okay. Wow, that. Sorry, I will change the font size. I'm not sure why it's doing that. uh, oh, this is. There we go. Balloon animals are for everyone. I think that should have an exclamation mark. Do, do we really want? Are we boycotting children? Boy, no. Oh yeah, I feel like we're mixing that one. I'm going to leave out boycotting children. Ooh, yeah. Uh huh. Steal children's ideas. Oh, rules are flexible. I didn't catch the first part of that. Children have ideas. Ooh, yes. In fact, I'm gonna move that down. Ooh. uh, yes. Children have dreams. Everyone has dreams. Mm-hmm. Oh. Everyone has dreams. Um, okay. I heard something about generosity. Okay. Okay. You know what? You know what? Something about generosity. Oh, commit to be unprofitable. I heard. Profitable. Um, ooh, that's a good one. We're kind of running out of space. So are we finished? I feel like we've got more ideas. Do you want me to squeeze some more ideas in here? Mm, okay. Okay, let me make a bit more space. Yeah. Oh, sorry, yourself. Play a new game every day. Uh huh. Folk games share power. Oops, hang on, I spelled that wrong. Um, okay, hang on. What? How do I make this all fit? Share power. Okay. Oops. Uh, okay, I'm going with folk games share power because I like that as a slogan. And I think we're going to go for one more slogan before we finish up. I think laughter is necessary. Oop, oops. Okay. I think we're going to go with that. I think I've maybe finished slightly early, but we got through our manifesto a lot faster than I was expecting. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to read out our manifesto, and I want everyone to join me for the final hurrah. Okay? So, the Why Folk Games Manifesto. People have been thinking too long that folk games is a privilege of children and the unemployed. Delight is not business. It does not belong to banks and fancy investors. Fun is food. You can't eat it, but they feed you. I will change that. Play has to be participatory and available to everybody. It needs to be everywhere because it is the inside of the world. Balloon animals are for everyone. Learn from children's ideas. Children have dreams. Everyone has dreams. Rules are flexible. Something about generosity. Co- Commit to be unprofitable. Play is possibility. Play a new game every day. Folk games share power. Laughter is necessary. Hurrah! Yeah. Okay, that's basically it for me. If anyone is kind of curious about some of the things I mentioned there, I included links on this page on my website. The QR code just goes to that page. I'll maybe mention one of the things on that page is a link to. Do I have it here? Yes, a link to a site I made a few years ago that just collects a number of folk games that I've played and that I want to play. I imagine that might be useful to or interesting to people in this room. And yeah, it's just instructions for the folk games as well as like various variants for some of them, and also a note on like where I learned that game from. And I think that's basically it from me. So thank you for listening to me talk. Thank you for making and playing a game with me, and thank you for writing a manifesto with me.